Rain hammered the cracked pavement outside the diner, and Claire Dawson had exactly 4 minutes left on her shift when the front door burst open, and a man fell straight onto the tile floor. He did not stumble. He did not knock. He simply collapsed, as if his legs had given out the moment he crossed the threshold, and the cold night air rushed in behind him carrying the smell of rain, and something sharper, something like fear. Claire froze behind the counter, a coffee pot still in her hand. The diner was empty except for her and the old radio playing static-filled music near the register. For a second she thought the man was drunk, another late-night wanderer who had picked the wrong place to fall apart. Then she saw the dark stain spreading across the side of his shirt, and she saw his eyes, wide open, searching the ceiling as though he expected it to come crashing down on him. She set the coffee pot down so fast it nearly shattered. "Sir, can you hear me?" He turned his head toward her voice, and even through the pain twisting his face, there was something sharp in his gaze, something that measured her the way a man measures a threat. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, then stopped, as if he realized he no longer had the strength to reach for anything. "Don't," he said, his voice rough. "Don't call anyone." Claire's mind raced through every safe decision available to her. Call for help, step back, lock herself in the kitchen and wait for this to be someone else's problem. But something about the desperation in his voice, the way his fingers curled weakly against the floor, made her kneel down instead. "You're bleeding," she said. "You need a hospital." "No hospitals." He gritted his teeth as he tried to push himself up and failed. "They'll find me there. Please." She should have walked away. Later, she would replay this exact moment 100 times and wonder why she hadn't simply stepped over him and dialed for an ambulance like any reasonable person would. But there was something in the rawness of his plea, something that sounded less like a demand and more like a man who had run out of every other option in the world. She recognized him then, not his name, not yet, but his face. She had seen it once in a newspaper someone left behind in a booth, a grainy photograph beneath a headline she had barely skimmed, a name tied to money, to power, to a family everyone in the city spoke about only in lowered voices. She could not remember the words of the article, but she remembered the unease it left behind, the way her manager had quickly folded the paper and thrown it away, as if merely holding it was dangerous. "You're the one from the news," she whispered. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched thin, filled only by the rain, drumming against the windows, and his uneven breathing. "Please," he said again, quieter this time. "I just need somewhere to stop, just for tonight." Every instinct told her this was reckless. She had a younger brother waiting for her at home, a boy who depended on her for everything, and getting involved with a stranger who clearly belonged to a world of danger could put everything she had built at risk. But she looked at his hand pressed weakly against his side, at the blood seeping between his fingers, and she made a decision that would change the shape of her entire life. "There's a supply room in the back," she said, already sliding an arm under his shoulder. "Nobody comes in until morning." He did not thank her. He did not have the strength to. He simply let her half carry, half drag him across the floor, his weight heavier than she expected, his breathing shallow against her ear. By the time they reached the small back room stacked with boxes of napkins and cleaning supplies, her arms were shaking, and her uniform was stained with someone else's blood. She locked the door behind them, flipped the sign on the diner's entrance to closed, and pulled the blinds shut one by one, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Then she knelt beside him again, pulling the small first aid kit from beneath the counter, the kind meant for kitchen burns and paper cuts, entirely unequipped for whatever had put a hole in this man's side. "This isn't enough," she muttered half to herself. "It'll do," he said through clenched teeth. "Just clean it, please." Her hands trembled as she worked, peeling back the ruined fabric of his shirt, pressing clean cloth against the wound, doing everything she remembered from a first aid class she had taken years ago and never expected to use. He watched her the entire time, his sharp eyes softening slightly, as if he could not quite understand why a stranger would risk so much for someone she had no reason to help. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire did not look up from her work. "Because you asked me not to call anyone, and I still haven't figured out why that matters so much to you. Until I do, I'm not going to be the reason something worse happens." He almost laughed. though the sound came out strained and broken. That's either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, she said, tying off the makeshift bandage as carefully as she could. What's your name? He hesitated, as though even his own name had become something dangerous to share. Nathan, he finally said. Nathan Blake. The name settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. She had heard it before, whispered in hushed tones, printed beneath headlines she had never fully read. The Blake name belonged to power, to fear, to a world she had only ever brushed against from a safe distance. Now that world was bleeding on the floor of her supply closet, and she had nowhere left to hide from it. I'm Claire, she said simply, deciding that whatever came next, honesty was the only thing she had left to offer him. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face, as if some part of him could not believe a person like her existed. Thank you, Claire, he said quietly. I won't forget this. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and relentless, washing the streets clean of everything, except the secret now sitting in the back room of a rundown diner. Claire had no way of knowing that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to enter her life, a storm with a name and a face and a debt that would follow her into every day that came after this one. She only knew that a man had fallen through her door with nowhere else to turn, and something in her heart had refused to let him fall alone. She stayed beside him through the night, checking his bandages, listening to the uneven rhythm of his breathing, watching the color slowly return to his face as the hours passed. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words she could not fully understand, fragments of names and warnings that painted a picture far darker than anything she had imagined. Somewhere in those broken sentences, she heard the word betrayal, she heard the word family, and she heard, more than once, a name spoken with such venom that it made her skin prickle with cold. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the gaps in the blinds, Nathan Blake was still alive, still breathing, still fighting whatever battle had brought him to her door. Claire sat back against the wall, exhausted, her uniform ruined, her hands stained, and her mind racing with questions she was not yet ready to ask. She did not know what she had just stepped into. She only knew there was no going back to the life she had known the night before. Somewhere out in the city, beyond the rain-soaked streets and the fading darkness, people were searching for the man now resting in her supply closet, and they would not stop until they found him. Morning came slowly, gray light bleeding through the blinds of the small supply room, while Claire sat with her knees pulled to her chest, watching Nathan's chest rise and fall. She had not slept. Every creak of the old building, every passing car outside, had sent her heart into her throat, certain that someone had come looking for the man bleeding on her floor. When his eyes finally opened, they found her immediately, sharp and alert despite the pain still etched across his face. You stayed, he said, his voice steadier than it had been hours before. I didn't have much of a choice, Claire replied, handing him a glass of water she had filled from the small sink in the corner. You would have bled through the bandage if I'd left. He drank slowly, wincing with each movement, then set the glass down and studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away and hold his gaze at the same time. Most people would have called the police the moment I walked through that door. Or worse, they would have called someone else entirely, someone who would have paid very well for the information. I'm not most people, Claire said, though the words felt strange coming out of her mouth. She had spent 6 years pouring coffee and clearing tables, blending into the background of a city that barely noticed her. She had never once considered herself remarkable, but sitting across from a man who clearly believed the world was full of people willing to sell him out, she realized her ordinary decency might be the rarest thing he had encountered in a long time. Tell me what happened to you, she said. If I'm going to keep hiding you in a diner supply closet, I think I deserve to know why. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening, as though the words themselves carried weight he did not want to lift. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its guarded edge, replaced by something rawer, something closer to exhaustion. My family runs a business, he said carefully. Not the kind you'd find in a newspaper's business section. My father built something powerful, something that made a lot of people very rich, and a lot of people very afraid. When he passed, I was supposed to take his place. That was always the plan. And someone didn't want that plan to happen, Claire guessed. My uncle, Nathan said, and the name came out like a curse. Victor. He spent years pretending to support me, standing beside me at every meeting, every gathering, telling everyone how proud he was to see my father's legacy continue, all while planning to take it for himself. Claire pulled her knees tighter to her chest, listening as the story unfolded, each detail more unsettling than the last. Nathan explained how the men who worked beneath his family had begun to whisper doubts about his leadership. Small seeds planted carefully over months, maybe years. He explained how, 2 nights ago, he had been called to a meeting outside the city, told it was a matter of urgent business, only to find himself surrounded the moment he arrived. They meant to make it look like a rival family had come after me, he said. A message, they would have called it. A warning to anyone who might have questioned my uncle taking control. I wasn't supposed to survive. But you did, Claire said softly. Barely. He looked down at the bandage wrapped around his side. I got away before they could finish what they started. I've been running since then, trying to figure out who I can still trust, if anyone. I didn't even know where I was going when I ran into this street. I just knew I couldn't stop. The weight of his story settled over Claire like a heavy blanket, pressing the air from her lungs. She had grown up hearing distant rumors about families like his, shadowy names mentioned in hushed voices at the diner counter, by regulars who thought no one else was listening. She had always imagined that world existed somewhere far away from her own small, tired life. Now it was sitting 3 feet away from her, wounded and desperate, trusting her with secrets that could very well get them both killed. If your uncle finds out you're alive, she said slowly, he'll keep looking until he finds you. Yes, Nathan admitted, and anyone connected to me becomes a target too, which is exactly why I need to leave before anyone realizes I came here. You can barely stand, Claire said, more sharply than she intended. You're not going anywhere yet. He looked at her with something like surprise, as though her stubbornness caught him off guard. You don't understand what you're risking by keeping me here. Then explain it to me, she challenged, because from where I'm sitting, I already made my choice last night when I dragged you off that floor instead of stepping over you. I'm not about to undo that now, just because things got complicated. For a long moment, Nathan simply stared at her, and something in his expression softened, the hard, calculating edge, replaced by something almost like gratitude, almost like disbelief. You really don't know who you're dealing with, he murmured. Maybe not, Claire said, but I know what I saw last night. A man who was terrified, bleeding, and completely alone. Whatever your family does, whatever world you come from, that's the person I chose to help. I'm not changing my mind, because his last name makes people nervous. The diner remained closed that day, a small handwritten sign taped to the door claiming a family emergency, though Claire's hands shook as she wrote it. She spent the hours moving between the front counter and the back room, checking on Nathan, bringing him food from the small kitchen, watching the street outside for any sign that someone might be looking for him. Every car that slowed near the building sent a jolt of fear through her chest, though none of them stopped. By early afternoon, Nathan had regained enough strength to sit up properly, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed, his breathing steadier than it had been the night before. Claire sat across from him, a cup of untouched coffee cooling between her hands, her mind circling back again and again to the same unanswered question. What happens now? She finally asked. I need to find out who I can still trust, Nathan said. There were people loyal to my father, people who might still be loyal to me if they knew I was alive. But reaching them without alerting my uncle's men will be difficult. Every phone call, every message, could be the thing that gives me away. And if you can't find them? He opened his eyes and looked at her, and for a moment, the sharp, guarded man from the night before seemed to disappear entirely, replaced by someone far more uncertain. Then I suppose I keep running until I can't anymore. Claire hated the resignation in his voice, the quiet acceptance of a fate that felt entirely unfair. She thought of her younger brother, waiting for her at home, unaware that she had spent the night nursing a wounded stranger back to health, instead of coming straight home from her shift as she always did. She thought about the life she had built for the two of them, fragile but steady, built on nothing more than her willingness to show up every single day and do whatever needed to be done. You said your father built something that made people rich, she said slowly. There has to be someone out there who benefited from that, someone who owes your family a debt they haven't forgotten. Nathan considered this for a long moment. There's a man named Marco, he said finally. He worked closely with my father for years before I was even born. If anyone in this city still remembers what loyalty is supposed to mean, it would be him. Then that's where we start, Claire said, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. We? Nathan raised an eyebrow, something close to a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the pain still evident in his eyes. Claire, this isn't your fight. You've already done more than I had any right to ask. You didn't ask, she reminded him. I offered. And I'm not about to abandon you halfway through just because things are about to get more difficult. Besides, she added, glancing toward the small window where the afternoon light was beginning to fade, if your uncle's men figure out you were ever here, I'm already involved whether I like it or not. The truth of her words hung heavy in the small room. There was no version of this story where she simply walked away now. No clean line she could draw between the woman who had knelt beside a bleeding stranger and the woman who would return to her ordinary life as though nothing had happened. She had crossed that line the moment she locked the diner door behind them, and there was no undoing it now. As evening approached, Claire made the difficult decision to close the diner for a second day, knowing it would raise questions from her manager and cost her wages she desperately needed. She used the diner's old landline, careful and hesitant, to call her brother and tell him she would be staying with a friend for a few days, hating the lie even as it left her mouth, knowing she could not risk telling him the truth over a phone line that might not be as secure as she hoped. When she returned to the back room, Nathan was standing for the first time since he had collapsed through her door, one hand braced against the wall, testing the strength returning slowly to his legs. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them, an understanding neither of them spoke aloud, but both clearly felt. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly, lying to your brother. I didn't lie, Claire said. I just didn't tell him everything. There's a difference. Is there? She considered his question longer than she expected to. There has to be, she said finally. Otherwise, none of this makes sense. Night fell over the city once more, and with it came a tension neither of them could ignore. Somewhere beyond the diner's locked doors, Victor Blake's men were searching every corner of the city for the nephew they believed they had already destroyed. Every hour that passed without Nathan being found was an hour bought on borrowed time, and both of them understood that time would eventually run out. As Claire prepared a makeshift bed from spare blankets stored in the supply room, Nathan watched her with an expression she could not quite read, something between disbelief and quiet devotion. Why does it matter so much to you? He asked suddenly. Keeping me safe. You could have called someone the moment I walked through your door, and none of this would be your problem. Claire paused, considering the question honestly for the first time. Because someone should have protected you a long time before last night, she said finally. And because I think, somewhere along the way, everyone in your life forgot how to simply be kind, without expecting something in return. I'm not asking for anything, Nathan. I just couldn't watch you fall and do nothing. He said nothing in response, but the look in his eyes told her the words had landed somewhere deep, somewhere that had perhaps been empty for a very long time. Outside, the city continued its restless search, unaware that the man they hunted had found, in the most unlikely of places, someone willing to stand between him and everything trying to destroy him. Neither of them slept easily that night, both aware that whatever peace they had found within those four walls would not last much longer. Somewhere out there, Victor's men were closing in, piecing together fragments of information, following whispers and rumors through the city's darkest corners. It was only a matter of time before someone remembered a diner on the edge of town, a waitress who had closed her doors for 2 days straight, and a story that did not quite add up. The knock came just after midnight on the third day, sharp and deliberate against the diner's front door, and Claire felt every muscle in her body freeze at the sound. Nathan was on his feet instantly, favoring his injured side, but moving with a quiet urgency that told her he had done this before, this exact kind of careful, silent readiness. He pressed a finger to his lips and motioned for her to stay low, away from the windows. The knock came again, followed by a voice, muffled but unmistakably male, calling out for anyone inside to open up. Claire's heart pounded so hard, she was certain it could be heard through the walls. She crept to the small gap in the blinds and peered out, catching sight of 2 men standing beneath the flickering street lamp outside, their postures too still, too controlled to be ordinary customers looking for a late-night meal. They found me, Nathan whispered, more to himself than to her. How? Claire breathed. We haven't left this building in 2 days. It doesn't matter how, he said, already moving toward the back exit that led into the narrow alley behind the diner. What matters is getting you out of here before they decide to come in. Us, Claire corrected instinctively, grabbing her jacket from the hook by the kitchen door. Getting us out of here. There was no time to argue. The knocking at the front door grew more insistent, and somewhere beneath it, Claire thought she heard the faint metallic sound of someone testing the lock. She followed Nathan through the darkened kitchen, past the stacked chairs and cold grill, out into the alley, where the night air hit her face like a slap of cold reality. This was no longer a story unfolding in the safety of a locked back room. This was happening. Right now, in the open, with real danger only feet away. They moved quickly through the alley, Nathan's hand finding hers in the darkness, pulling her along a path he seemed to navigate by instinct rather than sight. Behind them, Claire heard the unmistakable crash of the diner's front door giving way, followed by voices calling out into the empty space, growing more frustrated as they realized their target had already slipped away. "This way," Nathan whispered, guiding her down a side street lined with shuttered shops and dim streetlights. "There's a place a few blocks from here. Someone I can trust, or at least someone I hope I can still trust." They ran until Claire's lungs burned and her legs ached, ducking into doorways whenever headlights swept across the street, holding their breath until the danger passed. She had never imagined her life could look like this, reduced in a matter of days to shadows and silence, and the desperate hope that the next corner would not bring them face to face with the men hunting them. But there was no time to dwell on the strangeness of it all, no space in her racing mind for anything beyond survival. They finally stopped outside a small apartment building on the quieter side of the city, its windows dark except for a single light glowing on the 3rd floor. Nathan pressed the buzzer with a code that seemed rehearsed, a specific pattern of short and long presses that made Claire realize this was not the first time he had needed to disappear like this. After a long, tense moment, the door buzzed open, and they climbed the narrow stairwell to find a heavy-set man waiting in the doorway of the 3rd-floor apartment, his expression shifting from confusion to shock the instant he recognized Nathan's face. "You're supposed to be dead," the man said, stepping back to let them inside. "I nearly was," Nathan replied, closing the door behind them and sliding the bolt into place. "Marco, this is Claire. Without her, I would be..." Marco studied Claire for a long moment, his sharp eyes assessing her the way Nathan's had the first night they met, though his gaze softened slightly when he saw the exhaustion written across her face. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing toward a worn couch in the corner of the small apartment. "You both look like you haven't slept in days." As Claire sank into the couch, grateful for a moment of stillness after the frantic chase through the streets, Nathan and Marco spoke in low, urgent voices, exchanging information Claire only partially understood. She caught fragments about loyalty, about men who had shifted their allegiance to Victor in the days since the attack, about safe places that might no longer be safe at all. "Your uncle has been thorough," Marco said grimly. "He's told everyone you died trying to seize power for yourself, that the attack was staged by your own hand to eliminate rivals. Half the men who once respected your father now believe you're the villain in this story." "And the other half?" Nathan asked. "Waiting," Marco said. "Watching to see who comes out on top before they choose a side. That's how it always goes." Claire listened to this exchange with a growing sense of dread, understanding now the true scope of what Nathan was facing. This was not simply a matter of hiding until the danger passed. This was a battle for an entire legacy, a fight against a man who had spent years carefully building a lie convincing enough to erase the truth entirely. "There's something else," Marco said, his voice dropping lower, his eyes flicking briefly toward Claire before returning to Nathan. "Your uncle knows about the diner, knows about the waitress who's been hiding you. If he didn't before tonight, he certainly does now." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "My brother," she whispered. "If they know about me, they might go looking for him." "They won't touch him," Nathan said immediately, though the certainty in his voice did little to ease the fear tightening in her chest. "Not yet. My uncle wants me first. He'll use anyone connected to me as leverage before he does anything permanent, which means we still have time to get your brother somewhere safe." The next hour passed in a blur of hushed planning, Marco offering names of people who might help move Claire's brother out of the city without drawing attention, Nathan pacing the small apartment despite the pain still lingering in his side, refusing to sit still while people he cared about remained in danger. Claire found herself swept along in decisions moving far faster than she could fully process, agreeing to plans that would have seemed impossible only days before. It was well past 3 in the morning when Marco finally excused himself to make the necessary calls, leaving Claire and Nathan alone in the dim living room, the weight of everything that had happened settling heavily between them. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold the apartment felt, how far away her old life now seemed. "I'm sorry," Nathan said quietly, breaking the silence. "This was never supposed to touch you. You were just supposed to be a stranger who helped me for one night, and then I was supposed to disappear from your life completely." "Well," Claire said, managing a tired, humorless laugh, "that plan didn't work out very well, did it?" "No," he admitted, "it didn't." She studied him in the low light, noticing for the first time how different he looked from the polished, dangerous man she had seen in that old newspaper photograph. Here, exhausted and vulnerable, he looked simply like a man who had lost nearly everything and was fighting desperately to hold on to whatever remained. "There's something I haven't told you," Nathan said suddenly, his expression shifting into something more careful, more hesitant, something Marco mentioned before you woke up this morning, back at the diner. "What is it?" "Your last name," he said slowly. "Dawson. It's familiar to me, though I couldn't place it at first. My father kept records of everyone who ever did business with our family, everyone who was owed a debt or who owed one in return. There was a man named Daniel Dawson who worked with my father many years ago, before I was even born." Claire felt something cold settle in her stomach. "My father's name was Daniel," she said slowly. "He died when I was young. I don't know much about what he did before that." Nathan's expression grew serious. "If it's the same man, it would explain a great deal. It would explain why finding you outside that diner wasn't entirely a coincidence, even if neither of us understood it at the time. There are very few corners of this city untouched by my family's history, Claire. It seems your family's path crossed with mine long before I ever stumbled through your door." The revelation settled over Claire like a weight she had not been prepared to carry, reshaping the story she had believed about her own life. She thought of her father, a man she barely remembered beyond fragments of memory, a warm laugh, rough hands, a promise to always come home that he had somehow failed to keep. She had never questioned the vague explanation her mother gave for his death, an accident, nothing more. Now she wondered if there was an entirely different truth hidden beneath that simple word. "I need to know more," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "About my father, about what he had to do with your family. I'll find out everything I can," Nathan promised. "But right now, we need to focus on keeping you and your brother safe. The rest can wait until we're not being hunted through the streets." Claire nodded, though the question lingered heavily in her mind, refusing to be pushed aside so easily. Somewhere in the tangled history connecting her family to his, there were answers waiting to be uncovered, answers that might explain far more than either of them yet understood. As dawn began to break over the city, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and gold, Marco returned with news that Claire's brother had been safely moved to a location outside the city, staying temporarily with a family friend who owed Marco a favor from years before. Relief washed over Claire so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to believe that perhaps they might survive this after all. But the danger was far from over. Victor's search would only intensify now that his men had come so close to catching Nathan, and every hour that passed brought new risks neither of them could fully predict. Marco warned them that the apartment was only safe for another day at most, that they would need to keep moving, staying one step ahead of a man determined to erase every trace of his nephew's existence. As the morning light filled the small apartment, Claire found herself standing beside Nathan at the window, watching the city slowly wake below them, unaware of the storm gathering just beneath its surface. She thought of everything that had changed in the span of a few short days, the life she had known replaced by uncertainty and danger. Yet strangely, she felt no regret for the choice she had made that first stormy night. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "I'm not walking away now." Nathan turned to look at her, something unreadable passing across his face, gratitude mixed with something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name. "I know," he said simply, "and that terrifies me more than anything my uncle could ever do." Outside, the city continued its restless rhythm, unaware of the two figures standing together at a window, bound now by secrets, danger, and a connection neither of them had expected to find. Somewhere across town, Victor Blake sat in his office, staring at a phone that had just delivered disappointing news, already calculating his next move with the cold precision of a man who did not know how to lose. 3 weeks passed in a blur of borrowed apartments and unfamiliar cities, each day bringing them closer to a confrontation Claire knew was inevitable, though she still felt entirely unprepared for it. Nathan had spent those weeks quietly rebuilding what his uncle had tried to destroy, reaching out through Marco to old allies scattered across the region, men and women who had once respected his father, and were slowly beginning to remember where their loyalty truly belonged. Claire had changed too, though the transformation had crept up on her so gradually, she barely noticed until she caught her own reflection one morning, and hardly recognized the tired, watchful eyes staring back at her. She was no longer the waitress who spent her days pouring coffee and counting tips, dreaming of nothing more than getting through another shift. She had learned to read a room the way Nathan did, to notice exits and shadows, to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. Her brother remained safely hidden with Marco's family friend, and though the separation weighed on her constantly, she called him every few days using untraceable phones Marco provided, reassuring him with careful half-truths that kept him calm without revealing the full danger surrounding them. It was a delicate balance, one she hated maintaining, but one she understood was necessary for his safety. It was during those 3 weeks that Claire finally learned the truth about her father, a truth that reshaped everything she thought she understood about her own life. Nathan had dug through old records, careful conversations with men who remembered the past, until the full picture emerged. Daniel Dawson had indeed worked alongside Nathan's father many years before, not as an enforcer or a criminal, but as an accountant, a quiet man with a talent for numbers who had helped manage the family's legitimate businesses. He wanted out, Nathan explained one evening, as they sat together in a small rented room on the outskirts of the city, candles flickering because they dared not risk the visibility of electric lights. My father told me once about a man who left the business entirely, who wanted a normal life for his family more than anything else. I never knew his name until now, but I believe it was your father. Did he leave safely? Claire asked, her voice tight with the weight of years of unanswered questions. As safely as anyone can leave that world, Nathan said gently. My father respected him for it, even admired him. He made sure Daniel and his family were left alone, that no one from the business ever came looking for him again. It seems your father found a way to protect you long before either of us knew we would ever cross paths. The revelation brought Claire an unexpected sense of peace, understanding finally why her father had always seemed to carry a quiet weight behind his warm smile, why he had insisted so firmly on an ordinary, unremarkable life for his family. He had known exactly what kind of danger existed in the shadows of the world Nathan came from, and he had spent his final years shielding his children from it as best he could. He would be terrified if he knew where I ended up, Claire said with a small, sad laugh. Maybe, Nathan said. Or maybe he would understand better than anyone why you chose to help someone in need, even at great risk to yourself. It sounds like that's exactly the kind of man he was. Their growing closeness during those weeks had become impossible to ignore, though neither of them spoke of it directly, both too consumed by survival to examine the feelings quietly taking root between them. But Claire noticed the way Nathan's guarded expression softened whenever she entered a room, the way he had begun sharing pieces of himself he likely never revealed to anyone else, memories of his father, fears about the man he might become if this fight changed him too much. And Nathan noticed too, the quiet strength Claire carried through every difficult day, the way she never once complained despite everything she had sacrificed, the way her presence had become something he relied on more than he was willing to admit, even to himself. It was Marco who eventually delivered the news that changed everything, arriving one evening with an expression Claire had learned to recognize as serious, even before he spoke a single word. Victor is planning something, Marco said, settling heavily into the room's only chair. A gathering, in 3 nights, calling together every family loyal to the organization. He intends to formally claim leadership, to make it official in front of everyone who matters. He wouldn't dare do that if there was any real doubt about my death, Nathan said, his jaw tightening. Which is exactly why this is our opportunity, Marco replied. If you appear at that gathering, alive, in front of everyone, His lies collapse instantly. No one will believe his claims once they see you standing there with their own eyes. The room fell silent as the weight of the plan settled over them. Claire felt her stomach twist with fear at the thought of Nathan walking directly into a room filled with his uncle's most loyal supporters, exposing himself completely after weeks spent carefully hidden from view. "It's dangerous," she said finally. "Too dangerous. What if it doesn't work the way you think it will? What if he has people there ready to finish what they started?" "It's dangerous either way," Nathan said quietly. "Staying hidden forever isn't a real option, Claire. Eventually he'll find us, and when he does, we won't have the advantage of surprise. This is the only chance I have to reclaim what's mine, and end this before it destroys everyone I still care about." Claire wanted to argue further, wanted to find some other path that didn't involve Nathan walking directly into danger, but she saw the resolve in his eyes and understood there was no changing his mind. Whatever fear lived inside her, she recognized it mirrored in Nathan's own expression, carefully hidden beneath a determination that had clearly been building for weeks. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not," Nathan said immediately. "That gathering will be filled with dangerous people, Claire. I won't put you directly in front of them. I've already been in front of danger every single day since you fell through my door," she reminded him sharply. "I'm not about to hide in some rented room while you walk into that alone. You once told me you wouldn't forget what I did for you. Well, I'm asking you not to forget it now either. Let me stand beside you." The room grew quiet again, Marco watching the exchange with an expression that suggested he had witnessed this particular kind of standoff before and knew exactly how it would end. Nathan studied Claire for a long moment, searching her face for any hint of doubt, finding instead only unwavering determination. "If anything happens to you," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show, "I don't know how I would live with that. Then we make sure nothing happens to either of us," Claire said softly, reaching for his hand. "Together." Over the next 3 days, the small apartment transformed into a quiet command center, Marco reaching out to every ally who remained loyal to Nathan's father's memory, carefully coordinating a plan that would ensure Nathan's appearance at the gathering could not be dismissed or silenced before the truth had a chance to spread. Old friends of Nathan's father began arriving quietly in the city, men and women who had spent weeks watching from the shadows, waiting to see if the rightful heir truly still lived. Claire found herself swept into the preparations, memorizing details of the gathering location, learning names and faces she would need to recognize, understanding for the first time the full scope of the world Nathan had been born into. It was a world built on loyalty and betrayal in equal measure, where trust was a currency more valuable than money, and where a single night could determine the fate of hundreds of lives connected to the family's influence. The night before the gathering, Claire could not sleep, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every way the plan might unravel. She found Nathan standing alone on the small balcony of their rented apartment, staring out at the city lights scattered across the darkness, his expression unreadable in the dim glow. "Are you scared?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Terrified," he admitted without hesitation, the honesty surprising her. "Not just of what might happen tomorrow, but of who I might have to become to survive it. My uncle built his entire plan on cruelty and deception. Part of me worries that reclaiming what he took means becoming someone capable of the same things." "You don't have to become him to defeat him," Claire said firmly. "You've spent 3 weeks proving exactly that. Every choice you've made since that night in the diner has been about protecting people, not destroying them. That's not going to change just because tomorrow is difficult." Nathan turned to look at her, something soft and vulnerable breaking through the careful composure he usually maintained. "How is it that a stranger who found me bleeding on her floor understands me better than people I've known my entire life?" "Maybe because I never expected anything from you," Claire said quietly. "I just saw someone who needed help, and I've kept seeing that same person every day since, no matter what name people whisper when they talk about your family." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering against her cheek for a moment that seemed to stretch far longer than it actually did. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said softly, "I need you to know that meeting you was the only good thing to come out of the worst night of my life." Claire felt her heart swell with an emotion she had been carefully avoiding naming for weeks, something that had grown steadily beneath the fear and the danger and the constant uncertainty of their situation. "Then let's make sure tomorrow becomes something good too," she said, Let's make sure it becomes the night you finally take back everything that belongs to you." They stood together on that balcony long into the night, the city stretching out before them, unaware that within its shadowed streets, a confrontation was building that would determine the fate of an entire criminal empire, and perhaps, more importantly to the two people standing together in the darkness, the fate of a connection neither of them had expected but neither was willing to let go of now. As the first hints of morning began creeping across the horizon, Marco appeared in the doorway behind them, his expression grave but resolute. "Everything is in place," he said quietly. "Tonight, we find out whether the truth is still strong enough to outweigh a lie." Nathan squeezed Claire's hand gently, drawing strength from her presence in a way he had not expected to need from anyone. "Tonight," he agreed, "we find out." The gathering hall stood at the edge of the city, an old, elegant building normally reserved for private events, its windows glowing with warm light that seemed almost mocking against the tension coiled tightly in Claire's chest as their car approached. Rows of expensive vehicles lined the street outside, a clear sign that Victor Blake had spared no effort in making his claim to leadership appear as legitimate and celebrated as possible. "Remember," Nathan said quietly as they parked a block away, hidden from direct view of the entrance, "once we walk through those doors, there's no turning back. My uncle will have people everywhere, and the moment they see me, everything will happen very quickly." "I'm ready," Claire said, though her pounding heart told a slightly different story. Marco had arranged for them to enter through a side door normally used by staff, avoiding the main entrance where Victor's most loyal guards stood watch. Inside, the hallway was dim and narrow, muffled sounds of conversation and music drifting from the main hall just beyond a set of heavy double doors. Nathan paused before those doors, taking a slow breath, steadying himself for what was about to happen. "Whatever happens in there," he said, turning to Claire one last time, "thank you for everything." "Don't say it like it's already over," Claire said firmly, gripping his hand. "We're doing this together, and we're walking out of there together too." He nodded, drawing strength from her certainty, and together they pushed through the double doors into the crowded hall beyond. The room fell into stunned silence almost immediately, conversations dying mid-sentence as heads turned toward the entrance, disbelief spreading across dozens of faces at once. Standing at the front of the hall, mid-speech, Victor Blake froze completely, the confident smile sliding from his face as his eyes locked onto the nephew he had believed dead for nearly a month. "This is impossible," Victor said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "You died. I saw it myself." "You saw what you wanted to see," Nathan replied, his voice steady and clear, despite the dozens of eyes now fixed upon him. "Or perhaps more accurately, you saw what you needed everyone else to believe." Whispers rippled through the crowd, uncertainty and shock replacing the celebratory atmosphere that had filled the room only moments before. Claire stood slightly behind Nathan, watching as familiar faces from the weeks of careful planning began stepping forward from the crowd, men and women who had once worked closely with Nathan's father, now standing visibly beside his son rather than his uncle. "He tried to have me killed," Nathan continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. "Not because I failed my father's legacy, but because I refused to let him twist it into something my father never intended. Ask yourselves why a man so eager to claim leadership needed to eliminate the only person standing in his way, rather than simply earning the respect he claims to deserve." Victor's composure cracked slightly, his eyes darting toward the men positioned near the exits, calculating his options as the room's mood shifted decisively against him. "Whatever lies he's telling you," Victor said, addressing the crowd with forced confidence. "Remember who has kept this organization stable these past weeks. Remember who has protected your interests while he was off hiding like a coward." "I wasn't hiding," Nathan said. "I was recovering from the wound your men left in my side, and gathering the truth that would expose exactly what kind of leader you truly are." A tense murmur spread through the gathered crowd, and Claire watched as several of the men who had entered with Victor began exchanging uneasy glances, their loyalty visibly wavering under the weight of undeniable evidence standing before them. Marco stepped forward then, addressing the room with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades earning the respect now etched clearly across his weathered face. "I've known this family for longer than most of you have been alive," Marco said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "I watched Nathan's father build something meant to provide stability and protection for everyone connected to it, not fear and betrayal. What Victor attempted was not leadership, it was theft, disguised as inheritance. The room's tension reached its breaking point as more voices began rising in agreement, years of quiet doubt about Victor's intentions finally finding the courage to speak openly. Victor's expression shifted from confidence to something closer to panic as he realized the ground beneath him was crumbling with every passing second. "This isn't over," Victor said, backing slowly toward the exit as his remaining supporters melted away into uncertainty. "You think standing here tonight changes anything? I built alliances you know nothing about, Nathan. This organization is far larger than this single room." "Then perhaps it's time those alliances learned the truth as well," Nathan replied calmly. "Every debt, every secret, every promise you made to secure their loyalty through deception will unravel the moment they learn what you truly are. You built your claim on a lie, Victor, and lies never hold as strong as truth." Security officers who had been quietly summoned by Marco's allies moved through the crowd toward Victor, their presence a clear signal that his time to act freely had come to an end. Whatever happened to him now would unfold through consequences far more official and far more permanent than anything that could happen within these walls. A reckoning built not on violence, but on the undeniable weight of truth finally exposed to everyone who needed to see it. As Victor was escorted from the building, his protests growing fainter with every step, the atmosphere within the hall shifted entirely, transforming from tense uncertainty into something closer to relief and quiet celebration. One by one, the gathered guests approached Nathan, offering apologies for ever doubting him, pledging renewed loyalty now that the truth had been laid bare before them all. Claire stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching as Nathan navigated conversation after conversation, reclaiming his position not through intimidation or force, but through the simple, undeniable strength of honesty. It was a side of him she had witnessed developing slowly over the past 3 weeks, but seeing it fully realized before an entire room of powerful people confirmed something she had already come to believe deeply. He was nothing like the man his uncle had tried to convince the world he was. It was nearly dawn by the time the hall finally emptied, the weight of the night's events settling over both of them as they stepped outside into the quiet, cool morning air. Nathan turned to Claire, exhaustion evident in his features, but relief shining clearly in his eyes for the first time since she had met him. "It's really over," he said, almost as though he needed to say the words aloud to fully believe them. "It's over," Claire confirmed softly, reaching for his hand. In the days that followed, Nathan worked carefully to reshape the organization his father had built, guided by the lessons of the past month and the quiet influence of the woman who had refused to let him fall alone. He reached out personally to Claire's brother, ensuring his safe return home, and made certain that both Claire and her brother would never again have reason to fear for their safety because of the world Nathan belonged to. One evening, weeks after that fateful night in the gathering hall, Nathan found Claire back at the small diner where their story had begun, the very same booth where the newspaper article about his family had once sat forgotten. The diner had reopened under new circumstances, quietly protected now, a small but meaningful gesture of gratitude from a man who understood exactly what he owed the woman sitting across from him. "I never got the chance to properly thank you," Nathan said, sliding into the booth across from her. "For everything. For choosing to help a stranger who fell through your door, with nothing to offer in return except danger." "You offered plenty in return," Claire said with a small smile, even if neither of us realized it at the time. Nathan reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "I meant what I said that night on the balcony. Meeting you was the only good thing to come from the worst experience of my life. I don't want that to be where our story ends, Claire. I want to know what comes next, together, if you're willing." Claire looked at him, at the man who had fallen through her door as a stranger, and left as someone she could no longer imagine her life without, and felt certainty settle warmly through her chest, the same certainty that had guided her every decision since that first stormy night. "I already told you once," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his. "I wasn't walking away then, and I'm not planning to start now." Outside the diner, the city continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place within its streets, unaware of the empire that had nearly fallen, and the two unlikely people who had ultimately saved it together. What had begun as an act of simple compassion on a rain-soaked night had become something far greater, a bond strong enough to withstand betrayal, danger, and the weight of an entire hidden world. And as Claire sat there, hand in hand with the man she had once found bleeding on her floor, she understood with complete certainty that some of life's most important stories begin not with grand plans or careful decisions, but with a single moment of courage, a willingness to help someone in need, without asking what it might cost. That single choice had changed everything, and neither of them would ever be the same because of it.